Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the sources you send us and we'll really try to pull out the key insights.
Think of it as a way to get up to speed efficiently and maybe find some connections you didn't expect.
Today, we're diving into the artist Bob Camblin. Our sources are the Camblin Retrospective 1956-1993 and a collection called Bob Camblin Quotes and Other Mysteries.
Yeah, so we're looking at his art, his life, and his own thoughts.
Exactly. Our goal for you is to get a richer sense of his whole artistic journey. How his views changed and the themes that keep popping up in his work and his writings.
And we've got a good mix here. Reviews, quotes, observations, lots of different angles.
Definitely. So let's maybe start with his early recognition. The retrospective mentions a 1964 group show.
Right, down in Florida, St. Armand's Gallery.
And it got some press attention from the Sarasota Herald-Tribune. A critic named Clyde Burnett wrote about it.
He did. Burnett mentioned Camblin was part of this group of artists connected to Florida, either working there or having spent significant time.
Sort of placing him geographically, artistically.
Yeah, but what's really interesting is how Burnett described Camblin's actual style back then.
Right. He called it very representational in nature.
So, depicting things you'd recognize.
But he also noted Camblin had an eye for the unusual, which seems, well, a little bit like a contradiction is brewing there.
It does, doesn't it? Because then he talks about Camblin's tight, immaculate draftsmanship, real technical skill, very precise.
Okay, so skilled drawing.
But that same eye for the unusual pushes the work, Burnett says, into the realm of the surreal.
Ah, okay. So even early on, you've got this mix. Precise technique, but applied to things that are a bit strange.
Exactly. Like, it wasn't just straightforward realism. There was something else going on.
Did Burnett give examples?
He did. He mentioned one called Victim No One, a crab beach grass, but with a brilliant red against a deep black sky. That contrast sounds pretty dramatic, not just observational.
Yeah, that definitely hints at something more than just painting a beach scene.
And another drawing had a complex pre-Columbian Indian motif. So, not your typical Florida landscape subject. Shows a wider interest.
Right. And what about sea memory?
Described as somber, but still sharp in execution. Again, that mix of mood and skill.
So Burnett clearly saw something special there. He said Camblin combined graphic imaginativeness with a highly developed skill.
High praise, especially for an artist seemingly early in his public exposure. It really highlights that tension between the imagination and the technique.
It makes you wonder, yeah, where was that surreal edge coming from if the base was so representational?
And it's worth noting, Burnett also mentions Camblin taught. He'd been at the Ringling School and in '64 was teaching up at the University of Illinois.
So engaged in art education, not just his own practice. That probably kept him thinking, debating ideas.
Could be. Now, interestingly, around the same time, 1964, something else was happening artistically, but way up north in Chicago.
Ah, the Chicago Imagists. Or the Harry Who.
Exactly. They were really starting to make waves then, kind of defining themselves against the New York scene.
And their style was very different, right? The retrospective mentions grotesqueries, dark outlines, filled in color.
Yeah, and sexual imagery emerging from surreal places. Definitely not the immaculate draftsmanship Burnett was talking about with Camblin's early Florida work.
Sounds much more, well, out there from the get-go.
It was a different flavor of surrealism, for sure. More raw, maybe. But here's the really intriguing part from the retrospective text.
That's that.
It says, "It is unknown if Camblin ever saw the group's work. His art incorporated similar components after his move to Houston."
Wow. Okay, so later on after he moved, his work started showing elements similar to the Imagists, but we don't know if he'd actually seen their stuff back in '64.
Right. It leaves open this question, was it some kind of parallel thinking, artists in different places tapping into similar ideas? Or did he encounter their work later, maybe in Houston, and it influenced him?
That's fascinating. That idea of similar components emerging later could be a zeitgeist thing, or maybe a later influence that just wasn't documented at the time he saw it.
Exactly. The Imagists focus on the figure, even distorted, and their own brand of surrealism.
Yeah.
Maybe it resonated with where Camblin was heading anyway. The source leaves it open.
Okay, so we have this early picture, representational skill, surreal hints, and then this potential later parallel or connection with the Chicago Imagists after he moves. Let's shift gears now.
To his own words.
Yeah, let's dig into that Quotes and Other Mysteries collection. This feels much more direct, getting his thoughts straight from him.
Absolutely. It moves us from critics' views to the artist's own mind. And there's a huge range of ideas in there. It probably helps to group them a bit thematically.
Good idea. How about we start with time and memory? He has one quote, "Fortunately, some things remain forever, or another 10 years perhaps."
Yeah, there's a kind of wryness there, isn't there? Acknowledging
Hmm.
permanence, but immediately undercutting it, that sense of things being fleeting.
It really makes you think about what forever even means. And then there's that really vivid one.
The Saltaire Summer 67 one?
Yeah. As they approach, the memory of songs and music stopped. Stopped at the moment the texture of its decay became visible to them. Sad how we all aged at that moment in time. It's so sensory, linking memory, decay, and aging all in one instant.
It really is. It suggests memory isn't just a recall, but an experience tied to, well, the feeling of time itself passing, even decaying.
But then he has that much more practical take on it. Nostalgia, like guests and fish, shouldn't be kept too long.
Right. And that dredging memory should only happen if it serves to jog the archetype crevices of the reptilian brain.
So memory is a tool, almost, not just for feeling good or bad about the past, but for something deeper, more primal, less about sentiment, more about function.
Seems like it. It's that contrast, again, the poetic observation, then the almost blunt pragmatic view. Keeps you on your toes.
Okay, what about art, philosophy, and perception? He says some pretty deep things here, like, look into the atom, you get what you need. Look into magic and you get what you need. Philosophy and art are in both.
Yeah, that's a big statement. It suggests, that science and something more mystical or intuitive aren't necessarily opposed. Both paths can lead to essential truths, and art and philosophy are involved in both realms.
It's like he's trying to bridge different ways of knowing. He talks about wanting a perfectly average view to enjoy miracles on both sides of science and magic.
Right, finding that balance, not having to choose between the rational and the, well, magical. Maybe that reflects the balance in his art too, the precise and the surreal living together.
Could be. And he seems to put a lot of stock in intuition. The sixth sense is to be, without a doubt, senza dubio, no doubt.
Yeah, like a deep inner certainty that goes beyond just logic, a kind of knowing.
And how does he see the purpose of art itself? He says art is not just images. Art for art's sake has become art for life's sake, or art for my sake, or art for survival's sake.
That sounds like a shift, doesn't it? From art is maybe purely aesthetic to art being something deeply personal, maybe even necessary for navigating life or for self-understanding, more essential.
Moving to nature and self, there's clearly a strong pull there for him. Find something in nature that completes you, and then surrender.
That suggests a real yearning for connection, for maybe letting go of the self into something bigger. Nature as a source of wholeness.
And you also get that feeling of being tied to the earth, but also wanting more. Like in Bright Day and I Soar, how cruel that my soul is attached to this earth, and yet.
That tension between the physical and the spiritual, maybe. And alongside that, there's this real self-honesty. I cannot tell a lie to myself for very long.
Yeah, that feels key. Like a commitment to facing things directly.
And his descriptions of nature are incredibly detailed, almost physical. The cosmos waves as me with tree leaves, sun-heated air moves across the electrons of my skin.
It's like he's tuning into it on a micro level. You can see how that kind of intense observation would feed into his art.
Definitely. That deep sense of connection. But then there's the flip side, too, that starker imagery. White crystals, white salt, right wing, white bones, all the way to dead bird, dead lake, dead sand, dead land.
Whew, yeah. That's pretty bleak. So it's not just the beauty, but also the decay, the death within nature that he's seeing.
That duality seems important. Beauty and impermanence, life and death.
Okay, let's talk about the creative process. He has some interesting, maybe slightly cryptic advice. Step off the train of thought. To find the power that is no power. To do the work that is not work.
Great. It sounds like trying to get beyond just conscious effort into a more intuitive, maybe effortless state, like finding flow, perhaps.
Power that is no power. Work that is not work. It suggests letting go of striding, and bending is not bowing. Maybe being flexible without compromising your core vision.
Could be. And he follows with that very direct, when you think, don't act. When you act, don't think. It's about being fully in the moment, whether conceptualizing or actually doing. Trusting the process once you start.
And he clearly prefers the visual sometimes. Much better than arguing is to look at my watercolor palette.
Huh. Yeah, let the work speak for itself. And I love how he breaks down drawing
Right, yeah.
into different kinds. Action experiment drawings for discoveries on paper, slow analytic drawings for discoveries in the world, and conceptual drawings for the discoveries in your mind.
So drawing wasn't just one thing for him. It was a tool for different kinds of finding out, exploring the physical, the observed, the mental. Very self-aware.
Totally. And this ties into his idea that process and awareness of it cannot be failure, which is pretty freeing for any creative person, right? It's about the doing, not just the outcome.
Definitely. He even says resist learning, learn to fail, learn
Yeah.
to relax, learn to feel, learn how to really think. Like, don't just absorb rules, embrace the uncertainty, the mistakes.
Learn through experience, not just instruction.
What about belief, knowledge, and intuition? I draw the sharp line there.
He does. Believing and knowing are different. He suggests most people inherit beliefs, but mystics know something else, something gained through experience where logic won't make the trip.
So valuing direct, maybe even non-rational, experience as a path to true knowing. And it needs that balance with logic.
Right. And he worries we might lose something valuable by trying too hard to understand everything rationally. We all are creative, but we lose our magic in understanding everything instead of knowing.
Implying that knowing involves something beyond just intellectual understanding. Maybe intuition, maybe mystery.
Seems like it. And then the kicker, belief creates the actual fact, which is a really powerful claim about how our convictions might shape reality itself.
Heavy stuff. Okay, let's look at art and society. How did he see the art world around him?
Well, he seemed a bit wary of consumer art. He talks about the difficulty of making something intimate and solid when the focus is often superficial. Puts him in a bind, he says.
Yeah, he felt aesthetics were based on shock and recognition, not contemplation. That sounds like a critique of art becoming too much about instant impact.
Exactly. A struggle between depth and the demand for novelty. He noted that concept has definitely replaced most of the traditional standards, making it potentially all uphill if you wanted to avoid gimmicks.
And he even wonders if art has evolved forever away from the precious and become more of a participatory one. That's a big thought about art changing fundamentally.
It is, and he wasn't too fond of critics, apparently. A critic is a legless man who teaches running.
Ouch. Pretty direct. And his line, the visual arts have finally become non-visual. What do you think he meant by that? Too much theory, not enough looking.
Could be. An overemphasis on the idea behind the work, maybe at the expense of the actual visual experience. But then he has this really interesting ecology of art idea.
Ecology of art.
Yeah, instead of judging artists, he suggests we should consider that maybe their work, even if it seems self-indulgent, plays a role in the larger balance of nature or cultural ecosystem.
That's a much more generous way to look at it. Seeing artists as contributing something, even indirectly.
Mm-hmm. And this idea of balance pops up again when we look at paradox and balance in his quotes.
It's like balancing and being for and against, followed by that image of missing the clouds, regretting it, then the mind flashing like lightning to reach a still pond.
It captures that dynamic tension, doesn't it? Holding opposing ideas and finding clarity through that. And just the simple resist and submit held in perfect balance.
And he mentions yin and yang, but seems a bit dismissive, how unfortunate this has become popularized. Like the core idea is vital, but maybe it got trivialized.
Perhaps. He values the essence of balance, not necessarily the trendy version of it.
He also just captures these small moments of observation, like tiny poems. Not a leaf moves, and yet we all feel the cool breeze.
Isn't that great? So subtle. Or, he walked by so slow that my writing slowed, my heart and also the wind. Just beautiful observations of connection.
Yeah, and those little snippets, the encounter on South Blevity, the trapped fish, the dragonfly in August,
Yeah.
they feel like grounding moments, finding meaning in the everyday. Reminds you to just look.
Definitely. Now, looking at later reflections and teachings, we get that funny, honest take on his teaching experience.
Oh, right. The first year I assumed. The second year I capitulated. The third year I'm teaching.
Huh. It perfectly captures that learning curve, the humility involved in really learning how to teach, not just knowing stuff.
So true. And his description of the ego. Following you as gracefully as a goldfish's shit.
It's startling, but memorable. A reminder of the less glamorous parts of ourselves we might try to hide. And again, he frames it all. Draw, teach, search, reveal, always framed in paradox.
That word again. Paradox seems central.
It really does.
And then some final thoughts on creation and perspective. He offers this advice about mistakes.
Yeah, there are no mistakes. You are doing the best you can, and mistakes are nature's way of telling you to trust your instincts. It's very encouraging. Frames mistakes as feedback, not failure.
Trust your gut. And then that hologram analogy.
Oh, the two bits of a hologram arguing about which is the biggest instead of cooperating. It's a fantastic metaphor for limited perspectives, right?
Yeah.
And the need for a bigger picture.
Which leads to his idea of the hologram, seeing the whole, the interconnectedness.
Exactly, a more complete view.
And it's amazing how he weaves in all those quotes from other thinkers.
Mhm.
Alan Watts, William James, Sartre, Jung, Fowles, Dostoevsky. So many different voices.
It really shows the breadth of his reading and thinking. He wasn't isolated. He was clearly in conversation with all these other minds, finding resonance across philosophy, psychology, literature, mysticism.
It gives you a real map of his intellectual world.
Mm-hmm.
So, wrapping this up, we've journeyed from Camblin's early work, that representational style with surreal hints, touched on the Chicago Imagist connection.
And then really dove into his own words, his thoughts on time, art, nature, the mind. It's such a rich tapestry.
And seeing his words alongside the critical views, you really do get a much fuller sense of the artist and the person.
Absolutely. Those recurring ideas, paradox, balance, intuition, connecting the inner and outer worlds, they really come through strongly. He seemed constantly observing, constantly questioning.
So for you listening, as you think about Camblin's art and his wide-ranging thoughts, maybe consider this. What single idea or question from him really sticks with you? And how might that change, even just slightly, how you look at the world around you?
It's worth thinking about, maybe even revisit the sources with that question in mind. There's clearly a lot to explore in Camblin's world.